Welcome. We are talking about how to reclaim your personal power. Such an important topic. We need to be able to protect and expand our personal power. And sometimes we don't, and that leaves us feeling like we don't have a voice. And we have a very special guest that is going to share some of her personal insights on how you can reclaim your personal power. We have Melissa Dill, Executive Director, Chief Privacy Officer at Kodiak Solutions. So welcome, Melissa.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here and looking forward to the podcast.
Yeah, I look forward to it too. So let's start talking about personal power. Why is personal power so important to you? Why does it matter?
It really took me a long time to understand even what personal power. For example, I would say preach to. I have three daughters who are adults now. I would say to them when they were younger, don't give up your power. Don't give up your personal power. And I don't know that I really know what that meant. It felt like the right thing to say. But as I've gone through my career journey, I think I figured out what I meant by personal power. And it's really as simple as this. Every time, and I'm not talking about compromise or collaboration, but every time we give up something that is important or meaningful or is part of who we are as a person, whether it's a value or a characteristic, we give up some of our personal power. And oftentimes it has nothing to do with the circumstance or the conversation that you're in. I really have come to feel that the statement, why is personal power important to you, is because that personal power to me means it's me, the power of being me. And what does that mean? And what does that involve? What are my values? What are my non-negotiables? What are those things that are important to me? And as soon as I started having that dialogue with myself that I'd had with my daughters for so many years, it started making a difference and helped me understand when, hey, wait a minute, what I am giving up some of my personal power. That helps me understand why I'm feeling whatever feeling I was having, whether it's anger or sadness or hurt or I don't like that. I don't know how to describe that feeling. And so it's a continual dialogue with myself.
I like that you defined what personal power is to you, but also the implications when you don't maintain your personal power, when you don't protect your personal power, which is a lot of those negative emotions, a lot of those negative feelings come about because you're not respecting, like you said, your values, your non-negotiables, and you're not being yourself. You're not acting in accordance with what's important to you. Of course, we don't feel great about that, right? And sometimes we don't even know how to pinpoint exactly why we're upset and frustrated, but it could be just that we're losing our personal power. That's very interesting. I like the way you define that.
Yeah, and along that lines, one of the things I use my daughters often because I have three daughters, some is those feelings are just that. They're just feelings. They're not right or they're wrong, but they're feelings. And no one digs into every time they have a feeling, right? Nobody says, why am I feeling this way? But in those cases where it's impacting you in a way that really feels uncomfortable, to really look at, okay, what am I giving up? What am I sacrificing that is leading me to feel angry or upset or I don't know what it is, but I don't like it.
Absolutely. I think those are very important questions to ask. And the answer might be there.
Right.
So let's move into an area where we sometimes let go and we sacrifice our personal power, which is with figures of authority. Psychologists often say that sometimes there's this whole thing with our fatherly figure. And so sometimes women tend to be afraid of speaking up and defining those boundaries and maintaining their power with figures of that they perceive as figures of authority or people of power. So I'd love to hear from you if you've ever had a situation where you had to speak up and reclaim that personal power with a person that had more authority, and how did that play out for you?
Absolutely. I can think of a story. I was asked to come to this individual's office and I was a little nervous. Oh gosh, okay, why? Okay, they want to see me. And why? This is not somebody I talk to on a routine basis. So I literally went upstairs to where executives of this particular health system offices were. So I went to his office, the door was open. I knocked on the door and said, I announced that I was there. He was sitting with his back to the door and said, with his back to me, "You will either make me a very happy man or a very unhappy man." And something in that statement triggered a response in me where, and I don't know where I gathered the strength to say this to individual, because I was intimidated. I said, I was always told that I was not responsible for how other people felt. And he slowly turned his chair around with a big smile on. And it was in that moment, and I still remember that was 15, 16 years ago. Still remember in that feeling like, oh, that might have been the right thing. He slowly turned around to smile on his face. And that moment changed the relationship that I had with this individual for the rest of my tenure in this organization, which was 10 or 12 years. And again, I don't know that I defined that moment as well. I just got my personal power back. But it was a moment that I'm still telling the story 15, 16 years later, where I recall that feeling of saying, you just said something to me, the body language of the back to the door, and saying that whatever I say or do next will either, I will have, this person will be happy or unhappy. It felt silly. It felt absolutely silly to me. And so I really, I think at that time, regained my personal power in that moment. And that did change our relationship going forward. And I was still had a very healthy respect for him, but I remember feeling much more comfortable talking with him, reaching out to him with questions, asking him for clarification when he asked me to do something or needed something about which I wasn't clear about. And had we not had that moment, I don't know that I would have allowed myself to appear with him. I didn't know the answer, or I needed clarification, or I needed help. So that story really sticks out to me. And I still think about that story every so often, about how, I won't name that individual, but how that really changed our relationship, all because I said those words. I'm not responsible how you feel. And it changed our relationship.
I love that story at so many levels. I talk a lot about sort of communication. One of the beliefs of people who are a bit more passive, people pleaser side, who really want to give away their power, is that they take responsibility for other people's feelings. And so the fact that you had that clarity and were able to respond and say that in the moment was phenomenal. And another thing that's interesting about your story is that after the event, after you responded, you actually felt an increase in your own power because you felt more comfortable asking for clarification, reaching out and having conversations and initiating conversations with this individual who previously was, maybe you saw him at a level that had a much bigger gap from where you were, but you reduced that gap because you elevated your power in that situation, even though your executive said your title was lower than his, but you elevated yourself personally and how you perceived your own power relative to his, and you elevated how he perceived your power relative to his. And I'd love to better understand, you said that the relationship changed. I understand it, how it changed from your perspective. How did he change? How did he change his interaction with you? I would love to hear that.
No, that's a great question. He ended up being a really an informal mentor to me, and would reach out to me and ask for my opinion or ask for my help. And please keep in mind, this was an individual that I only interacted with maybe 2 or 3 times a year. And so the way that he changed, the way that our relationship changed was, I think he was willing to invest his time and his energy and his trust in me. Now, it wasn't every day, so I don't want it to be like, and then all of a sudden, it wasn't that, but I definitely became one of his go-to people. And that, again, that developed over time. It wasn't just that one instance where I said the story I told about how being responsible for how he felt, but it opened the door for us to develop that relationship. Till this day, I haven't been at that particular organization for about 6 years now. To this day, occasionally we will message one another on social media or on LinkedIn just to check in.
You, in that moment, even though it had nothing to do with your expertise, you earned his respect.
I think so. Yeah, I think I earned his respect because I was willing not to say, how can I help you? What do you need me to do to make sure you are happy? Like you said, it was not in me to respond that way. I'm not sure where my response came from, but I think I earned his respect because most people, he was an intimidating figure as well. He was like 6'4" or 6'5". So he was a very, he was an intimidating figure. And I think that most people, he was used to people responding to him in that way. No one wants this individual to be unhappy because we've all seen that. And I just was able to make that fall away by that one response and then actively working and engaging in a collaborative relationship with him.
It's incredible how that opened up the doors for him to see you as someone who he wanted to invest more time in, who he wanted to get to know more. And then with that, you were able to showcase a lot of your other qualities. But really, the entry point was responding at a level that was at his level, not as a subordinate, as a human, as someone, yeah, a colleague. And you challenged his thinking around that. And at the same time, you were asserting your boundaries.
Right. Yeah. I don't think I realized that
Yes.
later. I was like, oh, that was good. That felt good. Maybe I should try that again.
Oh, it felt good. What was it? You said there was a gut reaction. In that exact instant, you saw that intimidating man with his back facing you. And it's probably one of his moves, right? To have the chair on the back, this tall guy, and say something just like in the movies. You see that scene sometimes. It probably is something that he has fun doing. How was it for you in that moment when you instinctively decided to say that? What was going through your emotions, your head, that you think caused you, that gave you the courage to do?
I think it was most likely, to be very honest with you, some sort of a gut reaction to an authority figure.
Like a
And
rebellious sort of, in a rebellion way? Oh, you're not going to control me situation?
yeah, I think so. I think it was a gut reaction to, that's a pretty strong statement. And again, I didn't think about it. It was just what I said at the time. So I think it was really just a gut reaction to this authority figure. And again, the whole setup, the back to the door, talking with his back to me, the big solid cherry desk, cherry wood. I think it was the whole thing that was like, okay, I'm quite intimidated walking in here. It could have gone another way. There are some individuals who that is their thing, to use that their authority or their power to influence and, dare I say, control others' reactions or others' behaviors or words. But in this case, it was a gamble and it worked, and I got better at doing it over time.
So given this situation and your gut response was almost like, hey, who are you to tell me that I'm gonna make you a happy or a sad man? I don't get it. Given your gut reaction, the response that you had, given it was a risk as well, significant risk for your career in that company, have you, after that, developed or challenged others more often?
My nature really to be challenging. I am one of those individuals. You bring up a really good concept of around women in particular. I have found that when women seek to understand, which is often ask a question to get clarity. So we're trying to understand, trying to gain insight, that it is often viewed as a challenge. And it took me a while to really understand that about myself. I'm not challenging. I want to understand. I'm trying to understand. I can be more effective. I can be a better resource. All the things, right? All the good things, if I understand the situation. That's me. So to your question, I'm not sure I'm answering it directly, but I did have to practice how I was seeking to understand, how I was using making sure I maintained my personal power. That's something I had to practice over time so that it didn't appear as though I was challenging. Yeah, because I did find that it's just when you brought that up, I'm like, boy, that's one of the things I had to work on really hard is how I presented my need to understand or seeking to understand. I had to be very careful that it didn't come across as I was challenging or that I didn't believe or didn't support. Not exactly your question, but it just led me to somewhere else. I'm like, I am keenly aware of that now.
Yes.
Make sure I'm seeking to understand in a way that doesn't come across as though I'm challenging.
That's a great point, because it can come across that way. I have actually two follow-up questions on this. The first one is just back to the story that you just shared about your response. What were your personal learnings from that situation? And then on the seeking to understand without challenging, what are some of the ways that you've discovered to do that that doesn't come across in a negative way?
Yes, to your first question, are some of my personal learnings? I think were your first questions. One, it helped me to take a risk. I historically and to this day, I still battle with being risk averse when it comes. Most people are, right. Nobody wants to get in a conflict. Not many people enjoy those things. But I tend to be a little more risk averse when it comes to conversations, when it comes to voicing my opinion or being concerned about something or voicing how I feel about something. And so that was risky for me to say what I said. I was always told I'm not responsible for how other people feel. So I walked away from that saying that wasn't so hard. I don't know that I would say that same thing as directly now in that situation. But again, it was a different time in my career. I was at a different point in terms of my own experience and my own personal growth and maturity. So I think the biggest learning that came out of that was that it's okay to take a risk and then refine that messaging. Again, I would probably not say those exact words today because it's a very direct, very reactionary, response. So I think taking a risk, and then it just gave me the opportunity to say, okay, reclaiming my personal power is really important, but I also have to do so in a way that allows me to regain that personal power without it being a statement. And there's lots of statements that are challenging to. You just have to be very careful. That's what I'm saying. There are a lot of statements that you can say that take away from your personal power. You report to me. I am your boss. This is not your role. This is not your concern. Those actually take away from your message of personal power. And I never would say those words, but those are just examples of things that have been said to me in the past. And it's helped me strengthen my personal power, but it's also had me look at other individuals and those are real examples of words that have been said to me where I've said, I'm not going to let you take my personal power, but also you individuals saying those words must have some challenges with your own perception of yourself or your personal power. I am not when someone says, I am your boss, that is not of your concern. Those very direct statements now, as I have grown through experience, have helped me understand people better. Okay, this might not be about my personal power. This is about yours and what you need to make clear to me to make sure you maintain your personal.
But is that something that you tell people after they say those things, or is that just how you're thinking about it?
It depends on the situation. Sometimes it depends on the relationship, right? Sometimes in the spirit of building a relationship, particularly in the workplace, you can't always say what you're thinking. You can't always say, that's a statement about your personal power, not mine, or I'm just seeking to understand why do you feel the need to tell me you're my boss? Those aren't really, sometimes you just can't have that conversation with certain types of individuals. And so it really depends on the relationship.
Great examples. And has there been a situation where you felt a little bit disappointed with a situation and you felt like something had to change?
Yeah, so a story comes to mind around a performance review that I had. So I am not humble bragging, but I have always been an A student and was always rewarded in some way for being an A student and being cooperative and being funny and being she'll step in and help out. And so I've always been rewarded for that. And I had a situation with a performance review by a former supervisor who was at the same company, but he was my direct boss. So he was the next level up in a exec. He was pretty high level executive who I'm still great friends with to this day. I'll come back to that. Where he did my first time he did my performance review, and on a 1 to 5 scale, I didn't get all fives. And that was crushing. And I was not 25. In fact, I was not 35. I was well in my mid career. I was in my 40s. And that was tough to have a performance review where I was not an A student. And part of that conversation in that performance review, I did have the opportunity, I did have the relationship with this individual to say, I'm disappointed that whatever my score was, I don't even recall at this point, but it wasn't a 5. It wasn't 5.0. It wasn't, that was my average score. I had the opportunity to talk with him about I was disappointed that I wasn't an A student. And he was the first person who had done a performance review for me who gave me some really good advice in terms of growing into an executive leadership position and continuing to learn and grow and being a female leader. And I was a female leader, or I am a female leader in technology at a time. It's much better now over the last 10 years, but I was a female leader in technology when there weren't many of us. There were not many female technology senior leaders or executives. And he gave me some nuggets, if you will. And one of the things that he said to me, again, this was probably 10, 12 years ago now at this point, he said, Melissa, if you're intending to go down this leadership path, actually, whatever environment you're going to work in, if you're going to swim with sharks, you're going to need to thicken your skin. And that was followed by a comment, and it stuck with me again. It's one of those quotes that I'm like, if you're going to swim with sharks, you got to thicken your skin. The whole lesson there, and we had conversation about it, was that I really took it personally. I was taking a lot of feedback personally because I'd always been an A student. I had been set up in my brain and in my heart to think I'm an A student. I knew I wasn't an A student all the time. I knew that. My own internal messaging was telling me I have to do better. I have to be the best. I have to volunteer. I have to be first. I have to be an A student. And this conversation was like, Melissa, you will not always be an A student. And if you're going to go this leadership path, you really need to have this honest dialogue with yourself, but also have this honest dialogue with others. When they're giving you feedback, you cannot always expect someone to say, you're an A, you're a 5, you're perfect, because there's nowhere to go from there. How do you grow? How do you develop? How do you learn? And that story just really sticks with me. Now, did my skin get super thick? No, I still get my feelings hurt. But what I try to do, think about how I react and think about however my feelings get hurt, what are they tapping into? Whatever words were said or actions were done, what are they tapping into with me that I feel hurt or that I feel sad or that I want to lay in bed at night and think about it? Why did I say that? I should have said it this way. If only I had done this. And so I'll have that perfected. But again, it's a practice that just have to practice over and over again. Why did that hurt my feelings? That wasn't personal. And it's just this dialogue that I always encourage early career women, and I do mentoring, to have that dialogue with themselves, give themselves grace, Allow them to not be an A student. It's okay. Don't personalize feedback.
Yeah, don't personalize feedback. And you still feel the feelings of disappointment, all of that, but you're better able to cope with it because now you have a new narrative and you know how to self-talk and make sense out of the situation. And so that helps you cope with the feedback. Now,
Yeah.
I'm still interested in the shark comment. He said, if you want to swim with the sharks, if you're moving up, you'll need to thicken your skin. Does that mean, was the intent there of that comment the fact that as you kept growing, people were going to be more direct, maybe a little bit more blunt about things? If I were giving feedback to someone who was just starting out, more junior, I would really be careful with the words and make them feel like really special before I shared anything. But for more senior people, I'm not as careful about feelings as much because you assume that they've already dealt with it. They already know how to deal and cope and handle those things and that they welcome feedback. So what is the shark part in that conversation?
I think that's exactly it. As I was making the transition from mid-career into you now have a title of vice president. You've been at this for how many years, right? 18, 20 years. You are going to be dealing with very senior executives, in this particular instance, of a very large company. And these senior executives, I think you hit on it exactly, right? The more senior you are and the more senior people that you are dealing with, there are assumptions in those conversations that you understand, that you will know what to do, that you will take the ask or take the request or the directive and make it happen. And that there might not even be a lot of time from these high level senior executives to talk with you because they expect at your level that you know what to do. And so I think the shark comment, and I think it was really based on that. I don't think it was meant in a they will eat you alive or rip off a limb. I think it was, Melissa, you're becoming a more senior leader and you're going to be dealing with individuals who have levels of responsibility and scopes of responsibility and the same experience or maybe even 10, 20, 25 years more experience than you. They will have expectations that they can communicate to you or message you in a certain way, and that you won't personalize it, that you will do what needs to be done and get it done.
I can see that. Moving into something else, which is, again, with this topic of personal power, have you ever had to think about how you were going to maintain that power in a personal interaction?
Yes, I have. This was also a work situation. I have plenty of examples outside of work, having 3 adult daughters now and having them live around the country. Plenty of personal examples, but this is another work example, but it was very personal in that the situation was a new boss who was new to the organization. And every conversation after about 2 weeks was it felt like a personal attack when just in the conversation. When we talked 2 weeks ago, you said this, now you're saying that. Were you not telling the truth the first time? As an example, there were just, it was just always this, I was always on my toes. I felt like I was being attacked. And so I took the opportunity. I tried to work through it. I avoided tearing up doing the conversations. I tried to do a moment of, okay, how do I get into a Zen space, getting ready for this meeting, self-talk, don't react. But what I found is that I would hang up from the meeting, from the video, and I would be tearful. I would be, again, beating myself up. Why did I say that? If I just had said it this way, oh, wait, did I say that 2 weeks ago? And now I said something else? This constant internal dialogue that was really depleting my energy. It was putting me in but not emotionally, I was questioning a lot of my own judgment and conversations. And it was taking my personal power. I realized that. Again, why am I responding this way? What is happening? So I gathered up the courage and I said, I would like to get some feedback. How do you think things are going? We've had some very candid and transparent conversations over the last X months. I'd like your feedback. I'd like to have some dialogue about how you think things are going. And basically, the response, the first conversation that when I asked that feedback, it says, let's talk about it the next time we meet, which I thought was interesting. I was like, typically it's often difficult for people to ask for feedback directly, right? I'd love to talk to you about how you think I'm doing, particularly if the relationship is a little tenuous. So the first time it was put off to our next time that we met. That time we didn't have enough time to discuss it. So it was put off to a third meeting. Now, all these 3 meetings occurred within a week. So I want to give credit where credit's due. But when the third conversation occurred and the individual said, I know that you would like some feedback. So I would like for you to take the opportunity and to think about that and put that in a document and we'll talk about it in 3 to 4 weeks. For me, I accepted that. And that was, I had this moment of saying, I've got to take my personal power back. I've asked for feedback now 3 times. My leadership experience is that if someone asks me for feedback, you give it then. It's real-time feedback, right? I understand if it's a performance issue and you want to think about it but you have the dialogue and you acknowledge that you've been asked. And as a leader, you provide the feedback that you can. I realize that gets perhaps easier as you go through your career and you become more and more experienced at giving feedback. I realize that. So my reaction that day was, okay. And I have to be honest with you, I had no intention of waiting 3 to 4 weeks and putting it in writing. I just was not going to do that. And I felt like I'd attempted to solve the challenges in the relationship. And so I had to do something that was very foreign to me, which was actually to the next level in the organization, which never feels good. Any of your audience that's listening to this podcast, that shouldn't feel really good for many people, right? To say, okay, I'm just going to work around you, whoever you is, I'm going to work around you, whether that be that person's boss or work around with other people, but avoiding the dialogue is never, in my mind, a good thing. But in this case, I felt like I had the dialogue and I had tried to have the dialogue and it wasn't working. So again, it was risky, but I took back my power. I thought it through. I actually developed a script so that when I talked with this individual, when I spoke with them, I would stay on script. And I made it about how I felt, my perception, how the conversations were not and behaviors were not aligning with my values, my leadership style, my way to manage relationships. And I don't really want to go further into the outcome, but it allowed me to regain some of that personal power that I had allowed myself to lose, that was resulting in tears and questioning myself and this sort of negative internal dialogue about what was I doing wrong. And so was it the right thing to do? I knew it was a risk in doing it, but I felt like I had to do it, or else I was establishing and getting back into patterns that weren't good for me, weren't healthy for me. And I knew the risk was this could go really bad. This could go really poorly. The risk could be you might lose your job. I knew that those were risks that I had to weigh.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that story. There's many lessons in there. Those decisions in that moment were, on one end, that situation is really depleting your energy. You're ruminating over these conversations. You're doubting yourself. You're doubting your own judgment. And obviously, that thought process takes away from you and your work and your other priorities. And it had been accumulating for a while. So you had to make that decision knowing that there's a risk on the other end as well. But I love what you did to minimize that risk which was you scripted your conversation. And it's great because it's a heated conversation. Your emotions are heightened when you go to that person's boss, like when you escalate a problem to try to resolve it. But you having the script, having the time to think through it, maybe even get feedback on the script and really focus. You did. There you go. You got feedback and really thinking about what do you want to express and what's the best way to express it and what do you want out of the situation, which then in your case, and I think this is a great lesson for everyone listening, focusing on your feelings, on your perception, like you said, on what you want and your side of things, because that's the only thing that you can absolutely state 100% and not be challenged on. And so you did that, and I can see how that would have tremendously reduced the risk of that action and got you out of that hole that you were in mentally and that emotional drain.
It did. And it also helped me not be overly emotional because I was nervous. I had been tearful about the situation, but having that script and focusing on my perspective and the impacts on me helped a lot. Had I not had that script, I'm a talker. I don't know where the conversation would have went, and I probably wouldn't have been nearly as effective. And that was okay. Did it feel odd initially to have a script? I didn't read it, but I had it right up here where I could see it. So I was looking at the camera and I'm using it to guide the dialogue. And that was another tool I put in my toolbox. I'm like, I will use that again. I will write scripts for myself.
I am so for scripts, especially for hard conversations that can get emotional. It just makes sure that at the end of that conversation, we don't regret anything we said because we put some thought into it.
Right, absolutely.
What makes you feel powerful in general? Or some other things that make you feel powerful in your career, at work, in your conversations?
It's really getting to know yourself and knowing what your triggers are. What are those topics or those areas that you have awareness of, tend to elicit some sort of response or words or behavior or even an expression on a video, particularly now, or an expression in a meeting? Really being aware of what your triggers are. Now, have I sat down and wrote down what my triggers are? No, but I am aware of certain things that I will react to in a certain way. And so I think what makes me feel powerful or what helps that is to say, okay, I'm going into this meeting and I know that this person often says, Melissa, just so that you understand, because they've said it before. That's one of my triggers, because then in my brain, I'm like, they're assuming I don't understand. So let's close our ears and stop listening. And so that's an example of just knowing myself, being prepared with how to respond, coaching myself, if you will. Okay, this is a big issue, or this person always does that thing, whatever that thing is, does or says that thing, preparing yourself for that sort of conversation. Now, you have to be able to think on your feet too, particularly I think as you go through your career, right? You don't always get to say, okay, I've now prepared for this meeting, I have a script, I've got all my triggers documented. That's not being a human being. But really being aware of those things and interactions, whether it's an email interaction, a video, an in-person meeting, a phone call, being aware of yourself and what triggers your reactions. What makes me feel powerful about that is I feel like then I have more of an ability to identify what I can influence versus what I can control. And then making myself be okay with that. I'm going into this meeting. They are not going to bend on this thing. Is that my problem to solve? Is that what happens if I don't say anything, right? If I nod my head. And so for me, the power is in really trying to be aware of how I respond, how I react, what the expression looks like, what the words came out of my mouth, and not doing anything. But also the other side of that is knowing what's the boundary. That boundary's been crossed, and now I do need to speak, or I do need to respond, because it's not always you go in perfectly prepared for a meeting. We're human beings, And so sometimes things are said that come out of left field that strike you in a way that's, wait a minute, I don't agree. That's crossing that imaginary line of my values or the way I manage relationships. So I think, again, just being prepared, knowing yourself well enough to know what those boundaries are and how you'll respond when they're crossed. That feels like I've got my power when I can have control over my own reactions and emotions and responses.
So what I hear is the element of having control over yourself, which is essentially what you can control, is key here in maintaining your power. And the ways that you do that are by understanding you and understanding your triggers and your boundaries, what's meaningful to you, and then analyzing in a situation what you do have control over, what you do have influence versus what you don't have influence or control over. And then being really aware of how you respond, both with your words and your nonverbals and your body language.
Exactly. Exactly.
This has been wonderful, Melissa. I loved your stories. Your first story, I will never forget. I'm pretty sure of that. It's definitely one of those. And I think it's such a lesson for us to remember that we do have personal power, and it's up to us to figure out how to reclaim it, how to maintain it, how to cultivate it, because at the end of the day, it does serve us, but it also serves others, serves your daughters. So thank you so much. Is there anything else you would like to share today?
No, thank you so much for having me. I always enjoy telling these stories. My career has been, I used to call it an accidental career path, but my career really has been, to use a trite word, it really has been a journey. And the only parting words I'll say is give yourself grace. We all should give ourselves grace and allow ourselves to fall down, make mistakes, say things you don't want to say or shouldn't have said. And again, forgive yourself, give yourself grace, learn from it, and move on the best you can. But thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Melissa.